Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk, sponsored by Inglis and Darley. I'm Brent O'Brien, and joining me as per usual is Tim Rowe. Today, training costs in the spotlight amid concerns about the impost of extra welfare requirements, fewer race meetings in Tasmania, and what to make of the latest development in the Racing New South Wales and ATC court case. In breeding, Tyreel exits stage left. What is the future for Australia's live broodmare sales and Extreme Choice's remarkable yearling sales season? While in wagering, what do global challenges mean for the local industry and the crackdown on gambling influences? Tim, let's get right into it. We broke a yarn yesterday about the ATC confirming it would push up prices for trainers. Look, we're not surprised. Everything's going up, isn't it? I mean, it's the nature of it. But yeah, I guess Navesh Ramdani, we spoke to him. Warwick spoke to him yesterday. Warwick Barr, who works for us, spoke to him yesterday and had a chat through the sort of reasonings why. And it all seems very reasonable from an ATC point of view, but it's not maybe not so reasonable if you're a trainer trying to make ends meet, is it?
Well, as we know, training and racing, full stop, breeding, it's a low margin business. You need the big wins to sort of make it all pay. And whether that's as a trainer, the 10% and getting, regular Saturday winners, particularly for ATC tenanted trainers. I guess at the end of the day, probably not much scope for trainers to absorb that cost. At the end of the day, it's going to be passed on to owners. And bashing administrators is a popular sport in racing, but I can't really blame the ATC on this one. Again, they have to. I think they already supplement the cost of training in their tracks by sort of. I think, according to the last report, about $8 million, and they get money from Racing New South Wales. Well, all the clubs do that host trainers or host meetings in terms of runner starter subsidies and general training subsidies and things like that. But obviously, it doesn't cover the whole cost. So it's just one of those things, and it'll end up on owning a horse is expensive, breeding a horse is expensive, and it's just going to get a little bit more expensive, particularly for trainers with the minimum wage going up as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that the argument it's kind of some bits of issue discussion led by actually pro punter John Walters actually led a quite civilised discussion around this. I'll give John his credit on this one. He did a great job, basically, bringing up some of the challenges. But where does it end up? Yeah, if there's going to be extra cost in the system, who pays for it? Where do the PRAs sit in all this? And their ability to both, I guess, offset costs or reduce costs and make things work. Unless it's pretty like it'd be pretty fair for a New South Wales trainer to be sitting there at the moment thinking, rightly or wrongly, and possibly wrongly, it's all good for you guys to be going to court, throwing legal haymakers at one another. But what about us and what's it costing the industry? And if that's, if that there is a certain amount of money in order to, I guess, deal with some of these cost issues, there needs to be strong coordination between both the PRAs and the clubs and everything else. And it's hard to see in the current environment that's happening, Tim. So, I mean, I can see why the trainers are a bit peeved about this one, only from the perspective, and I said, the ATC is bringing forth its case or whatever else, but only from the perspective that they probably see that there is, money to be, I guess, better distributed within the system.
Yeah, and I'm sure the argument from, say, maybe Racing New South Wales and some of the other states would be that prize money is very healthy. If you get a good horse, it's quite cost effective. But most horses are slower than you'd like, and it costing you money year on year, but you're paying for that enjoyment. And I think we've had this argument with other data analysts and people that go out there and where the value is. At the end of the day, you're paying for that excitement and thrill. Whether that costs too much is, people might have to bow out. I'm not sure, but it's always been an expensive pursuit owning racehorses. But that's why when you do get a good one, it's exciting. And then if you don't have a win for a while, you wonder why you didn't celebrate it harder. Well, I certainly do. So it's just one of those. Someone has to pay, and whether the top comes off the prize money to subsidise sort of training facilities and different things, and that's another argument altogether with the sleep app potential being brought in, and could that money be better spent on facilities to avoid sort of lameness or breakdowns and things like that? It's never ending. We'll be here all day if we talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just a quick one on that sleep. That was obviously a story we covered last week. Again, New South Wales Trainers Association, Richie Callender spoke to you last week, so expressed there. I guess they understand the purpose of the sleep app and how it's going to work, but there's a couple of questions around about the cost of the app itself, but also the cost of resourcing as well in order to monitor these things and where the information's stored and all that sort of stuff. Look, I know that at the moment there's a bunch of meetings going on, and I think there's a meeting at Randwick tomorrow, Tim, to sort of brief these things. But Yeah, it's fair enough that the trainers are asking some questions of Racing New South Wales about how this is going to be implemented. It's not just New South Wales, like Racing Queensland or Curic have brought it in their measures. We've seen it used overseas with some, I guess, controversy. I guess any time you're going to have a different opinion to a trainer on the suitability or fitness of their horse, there's always going to be some tension, isn't there, Tim?
And Racing Victoria also sort of doing a bit of research, use it to a degree as well. And what was interesting, obviously, Race Curic use it for their feature races and will be for the Oaks on Saturday. Looking at the documentation that they've distributed, it doesn't. It still relies on the vet's opinion. It's not wholly and solely the sleep apps findings or the data that comes back. That's which I think is important from what I ascertained in New South Wales, hasn't quite been communicated properly with, if a vet and they do the app sort of says there's a horse is lame or there's potentially an issue, and then the vet says they're fine. Who makes the final call? Is it the vet or the app overrules? And I think that's a contentious issue given, you know, a an unraced 2-year-old might be sound as a bell and sort of trot up slightly lame, and then a 7-year-old gelding that's had 60 starts might be a little bit scratchy, but's also considered sound to race. That's the again, the contention with a lot of this app and how it is going to be implemented if indeed it is across the board.
Yeah, yeah, and that's sort of being rolled out. I'd be interested to see what sort of how that's received and tomorrow what else. Just getting back to that trainer's business model thing, Tim. I just while we were talking, I've just about ran a couple of stats here. The top 2 trainers in Australia in terms of prize money have earned more prize money this year than the next 9 combined. There's probably an argument there that maybe the way that things are structured, you know, that perhaps there's some scope there for other trainers to feel a bit aggrieved with the way things are cut up. I mean, I'm not too sure. Look, trainer business models are also at the heart of a discussion in Tasmania at the moment. Tas Racing have briefed stock, briefed stakeholders this week to tell them that highly likely they'll reduce 5 race meetings this year, 3 from Devonport, 1 from Launceston and 1 from Hobart. Now, obviously, it's a bit of a local story about that, but it is significant. I think 10 harness race meetings are going to go too, and it's based about optimising wagering and looking at costs and looking at all those things. Tassie's obviously, probably at the sharp end of this argument at the moment, Tim, in terms of including the trainers having sort of, I guess, challenges around how they are, how they're making ends meet and how things are working out. But there's some broader implications here, Tim, about the industry. And I think, we've seen Racing Victoria confirm that their meetings for next year, that they're small reductions, whatever else. But every meeting is now being measured for its, I guess, its commerciality and its ability to return investment on wagering.
Yeah, again, can't blame Tas Racing as such for sort of, I think the suggestion reading your article, Brent, is that those lost races will be put onto other meetings and
Yeah.
just avoiding some of those, excuse me, some of those fixed costs that they, have to meet to put on a meeting. And, as I said, Race Victoria, not every meeting makes money. That's the thing, but they have to be run to, as a service. New Zealand faces this issue. They actually every PRA would face this issue, and so trying to balance it between the top and the very bottom and giving every horse a chance to race, I think. And just back on your earlier point about the spread of prize money, those bigger train Waller and Chris Kieran Maher obviously would be the biggest employers as well. Heard on the radio this week that Henry Dwyer, who's got sort of 45, 50 horse in work, his wage bill's 1 million plus. So, they are significant businesses and big employers. And so whether Chris Waller and Kieran Maher are the most profitable as opposed to some others is, well, unless you saw the books, you weren't sure, you wouldn't be certain of that. But, they do employ a lot and invest a lot as well. So you can't necessarily hold that against them.
No, that's right. I don't think that's, and then they're just making the best of the system that they've got. But I guess that's a question about the way that things are spread. And particularly this year has become quite significant. Chris has had an enormous year, but $74 million in prize money is, a record amount of prize money. And you're right. You're comparing big businesses and small businesses, but even the medium to big businesses are not competing at that level. And he spoke before about prize money sort of being a bit of a, I guess, a sweetener for trainers. I think, trainers do have to, there are concerns around trainers' model. I had a good chat with Stephen Shaw, the ATA representative in Tasmania the other day, and he said that a lot of trainers, particularly smaller trainers, are effectively running organisations which are not making money. And the other challenge is that compliance, things like work cover requirements or workers' comp requirements. We talk about sleep app. We talk about other welfare requirements. all those things are all burdens. Now it's important the industry has those things, but the question is who pays for it, and that's a broader thing. Speaking about who pays for it, Racing New South Wales versus ATC. You and I had the pleasure of watching 2 days of legal argument, Tim, over over a couple of days last week, of which we were probably none the wiser as to the outcome. Of course, this case, Racing New South Wales appealing the ruling that it didn't have the right to put the ATC into administration, with a whole bunch of, as we've just spoken about before, other, I guess, connotations or knock-on effects from what may go forward from that, and their ability to, I guess, govern as a PRA. And the argument came down to whether whether clubs are subordinate to PRAs, or whether they're separate, and whether how that works. And the legal argument, I guess we're familiar with it, Tim. I think you and I probably have the same opinion. This one's 50-50. You flip a coin and get it wrong. And I think that's probably the sense, even from the parties involved, that the three judges that are making their decision on this one, there's sort of no clear view about how this may end up.
It was very sort of verbose argument, wasn't it? And I defer to some other people that I consulted and said, "What do you think?" And they were of the view that, yeah, it could go either way. I guess, given the ATC sort of won the first, whether they should be favourite because, an appeal is quite hard to get upheld, I'm not sure. But certainly at the moment, yeah, 50-50, you'd probably put up $1.90 each of two and let them on. And I mean, if you're betting on it, and the timelines for a decision, who knows? How long's a piece of string? Could be a few weeks or it could be months.
Yeah, I think they said on the judges asked, when you said urgent, have you got a date in mind? And they said, no, just general urgency, which is important because, we've got Racing New South Wales and the ATC having to plan their way forward. Just to matters on the track, Tim, Queensland Oaks this week. Obviously I was at Eagle Farm last week. The Queensland Carnival's having a pretty good run at the moment. It was some great racing. Good to be there last week. This week we've got the Oaks is a highly valuable race in terms of influence going forward. We've seen a lot of the winners of this race and horses that have run well in this race end up as very valuable broodmare prospects. We've got blue hens like Joy Denise, Triscay, Bravery, and Travel Light, who've all won this race way back and have had massive influences on the Australian stud book moving forward. And we've also got, it's an interesting race in itself, Tim, because we've got a lot of horses that, it'd be a highly valuable opportunity for them to secure a Group 1. Well, we've obviously got Panova, who's already won a Group 1, but we've got a bunch of others in this field who, could add significant future value and upside for their owners.
Yeah, Panova, does she, I know it's only up an extra 200 metres, but will she run the distance? And it looks like an open race. Some of those Kiwi fillies have been running sort of in all the different races. Have they had enough, or, back to their own sex? Can they, turn the tables and get a winner? As I said, it's quite an open race. Yeah, I'll be sort of watching it with interest, with no firm opinion. Even Silver Sister of Tony and Calvin McAvoy sort of coming back from 2,800 metres. So a lot of different angles there.
The following segment is brought to you by Darley. Darley Australia has announced its 2026 stallion roster with 16 stallions to stand across Kelvinside in New South Wales and Northwood Park in Victoria. Collectively, they have amassed 43 Group 1 wins, 81 Group wins, 12 Champions titles, and 8 race or track records. Two darn hot headlines the star-studded roster, alongside even sensational Animo, whose first yearling set the sales ring alight this autumn. Former champion European sprinter Harry Angel continues to rise at the stallion ranks, while Victoria welcomes the return of Dubawi's highest-rated son in Gaiath. Breeders looking up for commercial benefit of first-season stallions have welcomed the recent retirement of Tyreel and Observer to Kelvinside and Northwood, respectively. For full details, check out darley.com.au. On to breeding now, Tim. Yeah, story you put up yesterday, had you got a good chat with Linda Mons about Tyreel Stud exiting their breeding operation. They'll still be somewhat involved in racing moving forward, but it's an interesting one. They've had a lot of success, the Mons family, over the past sort of 12 or so years. Some really high-class horses. It's a tough business because the commitment you need and ongoing success you need to have in order to make it worthwhile, isn't it, Tim?
Yeah, they had, as Linda sort of told me, a successful year, is up and down, as anyone that breeds and sells will know. But they sold $1 million yearling by Sitzel, I think, at Easter and this year, and they've had, well, given the size of their farm or the number of broodmares, they've had a lot of success. Sort of at least 4 Group 1 winners have come off their farm, and Classic Legends sort of probably number 1, and they're still racing a couple of half sisters to Classic Legend. And they're not lost to the industry completely. They'll keep a few mares, but they'll just be adjusting them, in the Hunter Valley, and they'll probably have for the 4 weanlings at the moment that'll hopefully end up at the sales next year, possibly Magic Millions, and maybe some of the English sales as well. As Linda said, hopefully they'll be up there on the Gold Coast, being able to drink a few glasses of wine and enjoy it rather than the grind of the day to day running of a horse farm, which is basically, I think, the reason behind the decision. Getting a little bit older, she's hopeful of grandchildren coming along in the near, at some point in the future, and they'll still keep Tyreel and run some cattle on it, but you don't need that 7 day a week devotion that racing or breeding requires, particularly from sort of July through till, end of November, foaling down and moving mares to the hunter to be served and things like that. So it's just reach a point in their lives where they can slow down a little bit, and good on them.
Yeah, yeah, and Linda's always been very enthusiastic, good to talk to. No doubt there'll be a still face around the place, but it does probably raise a broader question about the future of these sort of, small to medium farms. I mean, we talk about small to medium business in every aspect of this industry. We saw Ridgemont obviously opt to sort of sell out of their mare farm and sort of basically relocate their breeding operations to, third parties. And we're seeing it across the board. We've seen a lot of smaller farms being sold, even there's medium level farms. It is hard, unless you've got the scale to make this happen, to run a dedicated broodmare operation. And even with you wonder what in 10 years' time we're going to have a situation where we pretty much, have a lot fewer farms, but they're sort of bigger operations too.
Oh, yes, and I think there is people out there that are, if they can get the capital together, they're willing to do it. And I think you've got to do a lot of the work yourself, sort of be a, master of everything, and do a lot of the work. So it's 7 days a week. It is a grind, and you can be rewarded for that. Just whether, I'm sure there'll be a contraction, but there'll be always those people willing to. It's a game of aspiration, and those people will still be there, willing to have a crack, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. And it might be the fact that they still own mares, but their mares aren't sitting on their own property. And that's the reality of it.
Mm.
As we know, property is extremely valuable where things work out. Future of live broodmare sales, Tim. I wrote an article for Run the Numbers this week talking about how the number of the money spent at live broodmare sales has gone down 70% in Australia since 2019. The digital market has definitely, you know, taken hold of that and changed the dynamic of it. Yeah, we used to have, 4 or 5 days, probably longer, of the National Broodmare Sale. Inglis chopped their Australian Broodmare Sale this year and only had their chairman sale. It seems to me like we might be in a situation, Tim, within sort of 2 or 3 years where maybe even shorter time frame where we've got one-day chairman sale and one-day broodmare sale with race fillies and broodmares. Do you think that's sort of where we're heading towards?
Yes, possibly. I still argue, some people, if you've got the right horse, getting in front of as many people as possible at a live auction, that adrenaline, you can't replace it. It's much easier to say no over the phone or on the computer as opposed to being there. You've done all the work. You want. Not many people have got the discipline to go home empty-handed. So, from a sales company's point of view, I think they'll, particularly Magic Millions and Inglis, will do much as they can to continue to have live auctions and make that viable and sort of different. And because, they've invested a lot of money in just the complexes. So if you're only using them a certain number of days a year as it is, so to cut down too much just puts into question the viability of the business. And I think there is still an edge in selling at live auctions, and I think that'll be for at least the foreseeable future anyway, particularly yearlings. And we talk about the national yearling sale, the extreme choice sort of when yearlings were a headline act and contributed to the year-on-year increase in aggregate. But also, you've got to give those breeders a chance to put them again in front of potential buyers. Yes, there's some poor results or things like that, but that happens at every sale. And just you've got to provide the breeders with an opportunity, and that's the mantra or obligation to sales companies, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Just on that broodmare sales thing, probably the aspect of this year, probably that which affected it, obviously, we spoke about, Tim. It just didn't have the quality this year across the board. There just wasn't the quality of mares coming off the track or race fillies coming off the track. I think that's probably, complicated by Yulon having a lot of these mares themselves, and also, yeah, and some private sales as well, sort of feeding into that as well. So there's probably a few factors this year which led to a decline in the broodmare market, and I think probably the level we're seeing this year is probably sustainable. But just wonder what might happen. Tim, we had a bit of a discussion slash argument over over WhatsApp yesterday, based on this theory, right? So if Via Sistina, right, if she was owned by you and me, we probably wouldn't be working at straight. But if she was owned by you and me rather than by you long, and we bought her out of Europe, for what if she sold for about 5 million Australian, or roughly that, and then won a further 10 Group Ones with her, and bought her to market right now, a daughter of Fastnet Rock, 8-year-old, put her to market. What would the price be, assuming all the people that could bid for her, Yulong, Coolmore, whoever else, Arrowfield, Japan, whoever else, possibly like Wathman or whatever like that, what would she go for? My argument was that she would have to go for more than $10 million. Your argument, if I don't want to make your argument for you, was that she might struggle to get that price. I mean, it's an interesting debate. I mean, it's completely theoretical, but talk to me about your theory on that.
Well, I didn't put a hard and fast view on how much she'd make, but I obviously, when you're talking about those top end mares, there's only a few players that can go to that level, and there's exceptions to every rule, of course. But my opinion or belief is that probably as good as Broodmare Sorrows Fast No Rock is, Coolmore, I think, have got a sort of, maybe it's not a hard and fast rule, but a rule that they don't buy older mares, particularly 6-year-olds. She's rising 9 now. I know she's in foaled Dubai, but if she were going to the Southern Hemisphere, she'd be 9 when she's covered for the first time. So that might rule them out. Arrowfield, yes, to a level maybe. So you're going Yearlong, should be right up Yearlong's alley. And then Katsumi Yoshida and Japan seem to like those horses too. But how do you get, if you're selling, how do you get two of them to make sure you got two buyers on the mare to maximise your value? That's the challenge, and therefore you risk maybe not going as high as you originally would have thought. And a good example of that perhaps is Arcadia Queen a few years ago, where she was past year, and everyone thought maybe she'll go to 4 million, but you still needed two parties to be on there, and she just didn't, for whatever reason, didn't meet everyone's criteria, and there wasn't the competition that they expected there would be. And Arrowfield ended up buying it privately from Bob Peters
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting
after
one.
his past year.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, I'd argue the fact she's a dual Cox Plate winner and she won all those races and her race record outshines the age thing or whatever else. But you're right, if Coolmore aren't willing to jump in, they're not willing to jump in. I find it hard to believe they wouldn't. But it's all theoretical, Tim, because it's not going to happen because she's not getting out of Mr. Zhang's hands at any time soon. And so we could argue it till the cows come home, and we'll slightly prove the point. The only other thing I wanted to mention, and you alluded to before, Extreme Choice's remarkable yearling sales season. His average price this season across 32 yearlings is $796,000, a little bit more than that, so just under $800,000. I reckon that would clearly be a record for any stallion that would have sold more than 10. I'll have to go through that. Might be a run the numbers for next week, Tim. We'll put that on my agenda. Often I'm scratching my head on a Sunday thinking what I'm going to write about. $25.5 million gross for a horse that's only had 32 yearlings. I mean, obviously the scarcity stuff does drive up the value, but his performance as a stallion, we saw that last week with his colt winning the straight size produce last week. His record is quite extraordinary, and they're just desperate to get hold of his best stock, aren't they?
Yeah, and then and this season he's had as you say, the winner of the size, and there's Hidrix, Chris Waller's, and B2B's Colours that this is where that won a race, sort of a slipper lead up, and probably didn't, things maybe trained off by the time the slipper rolled around. But be interested to see how he comes back at 3. So given the scarcity, that people are just prepared to, if you can buy, again, you got to have the capital to do it. But if you can buy a few, statistics say you will get a good one.
Yeah, yeah, and the returns of investment has been quite significant. The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. The catalogue for the Inglis Great Southern Weanling Sale is now available. There'll be 430 lots offered across 2 days on Thursday 11th and Friday 12th of June. Of those 160 lots, 160 lots will sell from 1 p.m. on the Thursday, with the remaining lots selling from 10 a.m. on the Friday. Previous graduates include Blue Diamond winners Streisand and undefeated Group 1 winning 3-year-old Well Written. Check out english.com.au for the full catalogue. Finally, Tim, in wagering, and just one I'll touch on here. I covered off a story this morning on the straight, which was about, I guess, some of the big players in the American market. We've seen this American market explode over the last 7 or 8 years to really become significant and outshine what we're having in Australia. Many of the people who are involved over there, i.e. Flutter, Entain, are involved in the Australian market. What happens over there affects what goes on over here. What is interesting is that in the last probably 6 to 12 months, there's been a significant disruption in that market, but through prediction markets. We've seen share prices for Flutter and Entain both. I think Flutter's more than halved and Entain's dropped off as well. The American, I guess, opportunity has not evaporating, but it's certainly becoming more questionable. Now, what's happened on top of that is we've now got BetMGM, which is Entain's representative, which has got 50% of it in America, subject to a takeover bid. We've got a major investor in like a billionaire looking to, he's bought 27% of Flutter. We've also got another big buyout over there of one of the big casinos / bookmakers that affects things as well. What the article does explore is what the impacts might be in Australia and what might happen, so that we're not immune from that. What goes on over there does affect over here and the nature of the gambling industry. So urge you to check out this one. The other article I urge you to have a look at, an article posted by Warwick Bay earlier this week, that a Victorian regulator sort of pretty much stepping up and saying, look, social media influencers and gambling are not a good mix, and we don't want to see this happen. Look, a lot of this is in reference to pokies, and I don't know, Tim, if any of our listeners or a few of our listeners caught there's a documentary that Sean McAuliffe did around about, influencers in the pokey market and how that worked as part of his stuff. I find that stuff fairly, I, I, it's effectively advertising, and it should be regulated. And you can't advertise pokies in that way in Australia, so why should you be able to do it on social media? Racing and I guess wagering, as we know it, and sports betting is a little bit different in terms of regulation. We know that they're going to cut back on that, and we know that there is a part of the government's move is to cut back on, I guess, celebrity endorsement and stuff like that. It's an interesting one. I think, I guess wagering and racing in particular needs to find a way to continue to promote itself. Racing is inexplicably linked to wagering. So if there was a crackdown which stopped people promoting racing in social media settings, that would be a net negative for racing, wouldn't it, Tim?
Yeah, I think I did watch Going for Broke, that doco's called, and as it turns out, I watched the last episode first, and I watched the first episode. I didn't realise there was a second episode, so I still need to catch up on the second episode. But it was actually, to be fair to Sean McAuliffe, I think it was quite reasonably done. I still think the argument for wagering as opposed to gambling at the casino or certainly the pokies is the mental puzzle that it provides and the how you go about finding that winner or that value, and I think that's part of the fun. Well, should be marketed as part of the fun. Certainly something I enjoy trying to. It's not just the next to go and the old school person running around going the next to go, like playing it like a poker machine. I think trying to differentiate ourselves from, or the industry from that is, I think that's how they market that. I'm not sure, but I think that's the angle they need to go down, is that it is different. It is good mental challenge.
Yeah, I think, the problem probably is, Tim, is that the way that it's presented through a lot of social media stuff at the moment is literally people having massive amounts of money on horses. And that's fine. If that's within the laws and whatever else scope, they can do what they want. But you're not, I mean, I guess it's hard in a social media clip to explain to people about the nuances of things. The other thing I just wanted to mention on top of this, Tim, was I was listening to a podcast the other day called Bet the Process, which is out of America, run by a couple of guys who are pro gamblers. And they had a guy on there who was talking about, he's a school teacher background, he's also a professional punter, about whether we should be getting to a point where we're educating kids and educating people at sort of, high school age, I guess, our kids' age, Tim, to about not necessarily all the dangers, but how we, yeah, to understand that, an 8-leg multi is a bad bet from a mathematical point of view and from another point of view. Understand about, I guess, to educate kids to actually understand what punting's about. So if they do go there and have a bet, they know what they're talking about. And I think it's, there's probably an attitude out there is like, no, don't give kids any exposure whatsoever. If they never see it, they'll never do it. But that hasn't worked with alcohol, it hasn't worked with cigarettes, it hasn't worked with drugs. So why would it work in a gambling context? So the ability for people to I guess come armed when they do get into a gambling environment to make informed decisions about what they're doing and know what's a bit of fun and know what's not a bit of fun. I don't know, Tim. It has merit for me. I know that there's a lot of people out there that shake their head and go, "No way!" But that education would be very valuable to a lot of people.
I I agree with that. People can bring up their kids however they wish, but I still think probably the alcohol is a good example of my belief is that you don't want your kids getting to 18 and then going to the pubs legally because they can and they can't handle it, or they get therefore you get yourself. That's when you get yourself into trouble. And I think gambling's the same thing. Teenagers are going to experiment and make mistakes and all that sort of stuff. But if you can minimise that and they have the understanding of gambling and the probabilities and different things like that, that they can gamble and bet because it is interesting and fun, and not do the whole rent for the week and things like that. And that can be only a good thing. And I've done that. Like back 18 at uni, it was interesting times. We learned to move on.
Yeah, well, I think the thing is too is that it's educating people. It's not necessarily getting to the maths. It's about right. This is a good idea or this is a bad idea. You make your decision on what you want to do, but you put some frameworks around it and actually gives people some understanding. It says it's not deep maths necessarily. It's just understanding how things work and getting an understanding of where things sit. And I don't know. I mean, I think the other thing too, Tim, if kids are going or young people are going to be exposed to social media where they've got old mate blowing his money in the pokies and looking like he's winning $1 million, at least they can see through it. And then for me, that's really important. The ability to go, okay, what's real and what's not real? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? Because it's very easy to glamorize these things. It's very easy to sit there and go, oh, how good's that? I've won all that money or whatever else. But the sustainability of the wagering industry in Australia is based upon, people's consistent ability to enjoy it. Some people's ability to make money. A lot of people just lose money. You want less people to lose a lot of money. Everybody lose a little bit of money. It's an entertainment product. If it becomes beyond that, it becomes a social liability. So anyway, I don't want to go too deep into that, but I do think there's some merit into that. It was interesting listening to that podcast the other day. Anything else from you, Tim? Any shout outs or anything else you want to put out there before we head
No,
off?
just on that topic, that we can bag the internet and social media, but there's a lot of interesting people and stuff out there that you can access and learn. And perhaps certainly wasn't there. There's a few books and things of that in the 90s and whatever, but certainly the last 20 years, there's been a lot of stuff on the internet that you can educate yourself for those that are gambling minded to sort of get better at it if you want to, if it captures your imagination.
There's certainly a lot of opinions out there too, Tim, as my old line. There's a lot of people out there who are punters who might not have another job who consider themselves professionals, but that's another argument for another day. Thanks for joining us on The Straight, brought to you by our fabulous sponsors, Darley and Inglis. Don't forget to give us a rating where you're listening to our podcast, and be sure to subscribe. Check out the Straight membership options, $19 for a month and $199 for a year. An absolute bargain, less than a cup of coffee a day to get access to all your latest information, all the important news and analysis that Tim, myself, Warwick and the team get across. Thanks for your time, and we'll talk to you again next week.